So what do we know about what is recommended for treatment of obesity and overweight? And many of you may be familiar with this already, but there is in effect a system of categorizing people and finding out what their situation is and therefore what services they may be entitled to. And some of you may have been involved in some of these. So the tier one approach is the idea that we should try and prevent more people living with obesity and overweight. And so we give people information to make healthy decisions in order to stop them gaining weight as they go through life. So it's that kind of environmental health promotion effect. Tier two is more for those people living with overweight and the lower levels of obesity to try and support them to have a healthier lifestyle. So that might be something including weight management support, healthy diet, physical activity, and some behavior change support. These are for people who don't have lots of other comorbidities, such as high blood pressure or cardiovascular disease or diabetes. The tier three is the area that needs specialist dietetic services. So tier one and tier two may be delivered by a variety of people who are not necessarily nutritionally trained or certainly not dietitians. So these are much more broad general information. But tier three requires specialist advice from dietitians and often specialist dietitians. So people who are working at Band 7, who've got experience and understanding of working with people with living with obesity and overweight. So they may also have hypercholesterolemia, hypertension, and other comorbidities, or they may actually be living with something else like celiac disease, that means their needs become much more complicated, diabetes, for example. So that's going to be your multidisciplinary type intervention. So it might be there's a dietitian, but there may also be a specialist consultant, a specialist nurse, psychology support, those kinds of things. And tier four is for those people who've got severe morbid obesity, very seriously affected by living with overweight or obesity, and therefore have reached that stage where they may be entitled to be put forward for bariatric surgery. So it's a system in place to try and put people into the right services. The challenge, of course, is making sure that all of those services are being provided consistently wherever you live across the country. And unfortunately, that is not the case. So I'm just going to run through some of the weight management services recommendations from the NICE guidance. So this NICE guidance was written in 2004, checked in 2017, but we're expecting that new NICE guidance will appear in theory in March, but certainly sometime this year. So they're saying, so if you're going to set up a weight management program, if you're going to commission a weight management program, what's it going to include? So one of the key things is that it should always address dietary intake, physical activity, and behavior change. Remember what I said about fad diets often don't include physical activity, but wherever possible, where someone's able to partake in physical activity, that should be part of the program. So it's looking at it from several directions. There should be multidisciplinary. See, clearly it says registered dietitian, psychologist, some kind of physical activity instructor or physio if that's appropriate. And it should be non-discriminatory, long-term follow-up by a trained professional. Now, bear in mind that it does actually say, minimum of 3 months. The NHS weight management program is 12 weeks. So it just about meets their own recommendations in effect. The focus should be long-term change. So we're not looking at crash diets here. we are looking at long-term change and trying to stop people gaining further weight. And within that, there should be a variety of behavior change techniques used, helping people to solve problems, to set realistic goals, helping them when they're struggling with a particular task, providing social support, looking at that environmental aspect, what's going on in that person's life, learning to self-monitor weights or behaviors, giving feedback on how someone is doing. So it's a variety of well-recognized and well-evidenced behavior change techniques that can support behavior change. So they should last at least 3 months. So the NHS programme does just that. And sessions should be offered at least weekly or fortnightly, and people should be weighed. So this kind of comes against that whole idea of health at every size. So you could discuss that. We need to make sure that goals for weight loss are agreed for different stages. So what's someone aiming to achieve in the first few weeks? What are they aiming to achieve by the end of the 12 weeks? Or whatever length of program they're on. You know, how can they be re-referred? Are they going to be seen again at the end of 1 year? There should be discussions about reducing sedentary behaviour, because there's a strong evidence base for physical activity supporting weight maintenance. You have to do a lot to lose weight, but supporting weight maintenance. And you need to be thinking about dietary targets. What are they trying to achieve? They should be individualized. So it's not just a one size fits all. We need to work with that individual person's needs. The ideal is that you don't ban specific foods or food groups, which again links back to thinking about fad diets, which often do that. Here, I'm not so keen on this. It says individual advice from a registered dietitian may be beneficial, but it's not essential. So this, of course, opens up the doors for lots of other people to provide nutritional advice. And that's fine if they're a qualified nutritionist. But there's a lot of people providing services that don't actually have sufficient nutrition training. So we want someone suitably qualified to promote physical activity. Bear in mind that people can be prone to injury, and if they're starting to do exercise that they haven't done for a long time and have multiple medical conditions, that's got to be taken into account. And we need to be thinking about, well, where are we delivering a program and who are we delivering it for? Are we choosing one particular gender? Are we looking at a particular community? Are we thinking about what that community group might need? There is this, yes, you need to monitor weight. You need to also monitor indicators of behavior change. And it needs to be respectful and non-judgmental, which you would certainly hope it would be. More recently, we've had a document called Tackling Obesity, Empowering Adults and Children to Live Healthier Lives. And this, of course, was influenced by the COVID pandemic and the realization that people who were living with overweight or obesity were much more likely to be badly affected by COVID. So some of these key areas that they came up with, majority of it, to be honest, is not new. A lot of these things have been in place for quite a long time. So their key plans really weren't terribly exciting. And if you look at the BDA, their document in response is about 6 pages long, pointing out a few of those facts and basically highlighting that it's full of gaps. This key plan, this new plan that came out quite quickly because of that recognition that people living with overweight and obesity were more severely affected by COVID. So there's lots of things there, some of which are already in place, very little that's new, very little funding. And if you think that a lot of these things might be provided by local authorities, of course, their funding situation at the moment is dire. They felt very much that it wasn't considering inequalities and could actually potentially make some of them worse. So not thinking about causes of overweight and obesity, not thinking about accessibility, uh, not considering that 12 weeks is just not long enough for most people to lose the amount of weight that will be beneficial to health. So much of it's been done before. No dates on when it's all actually going to come to pass. The other thing that's particularly relevant, and really pleased to see this come into play, is the BDA have provided guidance on eliminating weight stigma. So this is really interesting, and some of the papers that have backed this up are worth looking at, particularly one about people living with overweight and obesity and their views on what they wanted to be called or referred to as. So this is, these weight stigma guidance come out of that. So it's using this first person language, person living with obesity or person living with overweight, rather than obese person. That is a very different way of talking about someone, because if you say obese person, it's as if that's their only identity, which is really, really unhelpful. There's a lot of people really dislike the word obesity, and therefore we might be talking about someone with a higher weight, living with a higher weight. And making sure that we avoid stigmatizing language and stereotypes. If you think a lot of the photographs that you've seen, they've been very negative. They've been of people living with overweight and obesity, eating unhealthy foods, really not looking very positive. Whereas if you look at this photograph, we have people living with overweight and obesity, but they're having fun. Life is positive and they're exercising. So it's much more a positive way of looking at things. So our imagery is really important, and the BDA provided a catalogue of photographs that you can use, and that idea that you stop using images that dehumanize people living with overweight and obesity. And it takes some getting your head around this, but it so clearly is the right thing to do. And we need to be mindful of that we're not making people feel worse by what we are sharing with them or how we're sharing things and what images we are using. So I'd encourage you to have a look at those. It really does give you some useful insights.